magire mtuzeha sana nenda finira chechemekwe uyango sendezi magire mtuzeha sana nenda finira chechemekwe uyango sendezi magire mtuzeha sana nenda finira chechemekwe.
Bageri.
Thank you guys for letting me come speak with you today. I just wanted to give you a little taste of Kenya and the people and the environment that we serve in Kenya. Has anyone been to Kenya before? Raise your hand. So a few people around here have. So this is a picture of our great coast looking to the east. Y'all know what's on the other side of that ocean? Africa, right? All right. So Psalms 139, 7 through 10 says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast." So across the sea from Wilmington, Atlantic to the east is Africa. And so this is us on the shores of Africa. This is actually the Indian Ocean on the other side of Africa, but just playing in the ocean at one of our opportunities to break away for a little bit. This is my family, Becky there in the middle, and my oldest daughter, Natalie, who's 11. My son there in the back, Sutton, is 10, Beckett is 6, and Maggie Joy is 20 months. And this is our family, and we serve at Kajabi Hospital, which is in Kenya, East Africa. We served there from 2015 to 2017 as medical missionaries there, and we're returning next month in August of 2019. We came home on an extended home assignment just because we need a little bit of a break to break away from the medicine and some of the suffering and stuff that we saw there, as well as adopting our youngest daughter, Maggie Joy. Since I've been home in 2017, I've helped Dr. Mark Yandel open Dockside Pediatrics, which is a great pediatric practice. We are both strong Christian believers, and it's based on the Christian principles. And so we opened that clinic knowing that at some point Becky and I would be heading back to Africa, and Mark would take over all of the patients for us. And so he's going to do that here this next month. Wonderful Christian practice in town, and certainly very prideful of that. So why are you moving to Africa? This is a question that I often get. So working as a doctor and a pediatrician is wonderful things, and there's people all over the United States that need this. So why go to Africa? And I come back to 1 John 2, 1 and 2, which says, "My dear children, I write this to you so that you will not sin. But if anybody does sin, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ, the righteous one. He is the atoning sacrifice for our sins, and not only for ours, but also for the sins of the world." I was saved when I was 7 years old in Children's Church back in Oklahoma, where I grew up in a loving Christian home. I went down the aisle, as many of you have done, and confessed my sins and accepted Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. And I didn't do anything to earn that. I simply came to the cross and asked Him to save me from my sins. And that same grace is good for you, and as it was for me, as well as people all over the world. And so ultimately, the answer to the question of why do you go to Africa, share the love and grace and hope of Jesus Christ with some people that have never heard that love and grace and hope. And so that is the point of the matter. That's why we go over there, and it's something that we need to keep in the back of our mind as we do mission work and as we do ministry in other areas, of the real reason, the main principle of why we do what we do. I was born and raised in a loving Christian home. If y'all know my father, Greg, as some of you do, you know he loves the Lord, and my mom too. And so I was lucky enough to be raised and at church almost every single Sunday throughout my life, and grew up in the youth group and Baptist Student Union in college, and really didn't have any opportunity to not be part of the gospel. And so I am very lucky and blessed to do that, and I don't count that for granted. And as Mr. Rex told you, once I met Becky and was married into her family, many of you may know Glenn and Nancy and know that they also love the Lord very much. And so what a blessing it is to be born and raised in family that really loves the Lord. Don't take that for granted. That's definitely a privilege that we have here in the United States and many countries across this world. And then I also don't take advantage for the people that surround me. So it's always so important that we surround ourselves with godly men and women of faith, to be involved with church, be involved with Bible study, be involved with people that will definitely pour into you and not lead you astray, to hold you accountable to the word of the Lord and to the Bible and to the principles that are within that. And so I also don't take for granted all the men and women that God has placed in my life to help me get to where I am today. And part of that is the mission field. I wasn't really introduced into international missions really early on in life, even though I was part of church. I really came across that when I was in college. I wanted a break from schooling before I started med school, so I took a year off after college and moved to Senegal in 2001. And really it's in Senegal in 2001 where God solidified my calling into missions and into mission work. So I went there in the first 3 months. I learned language and I learned cultural aspects and wrote some basic medical teachings. And then we had 13 medical students and nursing students come over and work with us in Senegal of that year. And so we went out into the villages and we did basic medical teaching and some first aid clinics, all with the hope of presenting the gospel to them. Well, of course, Becky was one of those 13 that came over. And even though you're not supposed to date on the mission field, we quickly dated that summer, and before it was over, we knew we were supposed to be married, and we felt under the stars of Africa, and if you've ever been to Africa, you know the stars are brighter there than probably anywhere else in the world. Under the stars of Africa, we knew that God was calling our lives into missions, and I'm very thankful also for Becky, and she's a godly woman, and one that inspires me to be a godly man every day. So our plan wasn't necessarily what God's plan was, right? So we were planning on coming home from Africa, getting married. We moved to Kansas City, and I started medical school. Becky started working as a pediatric oncology nurse at Children's Mercy Hospital. And then I started residency at Children's Mercy Hospital, and we lived in Kansas City for 10 years. And then our plan was after pediatric residency that we would move to the mission field right away. but God didn't see it that way, which is crazy, right? You have a family that is willing to move overseas and do God's work, and yet he didn't see that as his plan. And so we had our 2 children in Kansas City, and then Becky wanted to come home to Wilmington. And so we moved to Wilmington in 2011 and started our lives here in Wilmington. I worked and started a job at New Hanover Regional Medical Center for Coastal Children's Services as a pediatric hospitalist. Becky was involved with World Medical Mission and Samaritan's Purse, and we got involved with our local church at Freedom Baptist. And we are just really started our life here. We started buying a house in kind of the same picture that many of you have today. And we really got kind of settled in, and then we went to a World Medical Mission Conference, which is affiliate of Samaritan's Purse, their medical arm, to look for a short-term mission trip to go on. And at that conference, God said, all right, it's time to pick up your lives and go back to Africa. And we really felt called back in 2014 to head back to Africa. But we didn't really know where we were going to go. We didn't have a people group or a place that we knew we wanted to minister to. And so we stepped back and we remembered kind of some of our conversations under the stars of Africa and really identified what is our mission in life. What do we want to do? And Matthew 11:5 says, "The blind see, the lame walk, and those with skin disease are healed. The deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the poor are told the good news." And so once again, our main purpose was to introduce Africans to the love and grace and hope of Jesus Christ. And our second point was to meet some of the physical needs of some of the most vulnerable kids in the entire world. I knew that as I was studying in medical school, I would study for about 4 hours every afternoon. I would start my studying with Bible study. And I knew during that time frame that God really told me he was going to use medicine in my ministry, and it was going to be internationally. And I never gave up that hope and that opportunity to do that. And so when we started looking at where to go, God showed us Kajabi Hospital in Kenya. And so we moved there in 2015 and off to Africa. We went with our 3 children in tow and really moved to a place that we had never been before, never experienced or anything. But I don't want you to feel sorry for us, because it is paradise to live there. So if you've ever been to Kajabi Hospital, it is at 7,000 feet elevation, which is about the same as Denver. It's too high for mosquitoes. There's no real mosquitoes there or any bugs of any sort. It's lush green. It's 75 to 85 year round, and it's cool at night. And so don't feel sorry for where we live, because it really is paradise. Becky and I often joke we moved from paradise of Wilmington to paradise of Kajabi, and it is so true. We love that place. We get to have, So it's Kenya is in East Africa. We live about an hour north of Nairobi in more of the rural area there in kind of a small little village. This is a picture of the Great Rift Valley, so you can see the lushness and the greenness. Our home actually overlooks one of this escarpment to a volcano. And you can see all the animals roaming around and some of those kind of things underneath. We have many different pets around, so not really. But we do get to enjoy many of the scenery. None of these photos are taken with any type of zoom. This is right there with us. And so one of Sutton and I's favorite things is to go on safari and enjoy God's beautiful creation. And if you ever have a chance to go on safari, then I definitely recommend that you get that opportunity to do that. So Kajabi Hospital is one of the larger mission hospitals in the world. It's about 350 beds. We have about 80 pediatric beds alone. And in 2017, we opened up only the second pediatric ICU in all of East Africa. We are a level 1 trauma center, and so we get referrals from all over East Africa, from many countries around that don't have any medical care at all. And we do about 90% of all the neurosurgery in Kenya at Kajabi Hospital. So it's a really big place, and we're taking care of some really sick kids. So in 2015 to 17, we were there, and we served, and we worked. And I'll show you some of what we did before. But we loved it there. Our kids thrived there. I loved the medicine there. Sure, there were hardships, there's diseases, there's illness and diarrhea and everything else that goes along with living in Africa. But at the same time, this is the place that we loved and we felt called to. But in early 2017, God, for some reason, told us it was time to go home. And we were in denial. We didn't want to leave. We didn't want to come back here and live. We really felt Kajabi was starting to be our home. And our mission didn't want to either. When we went and told them this, they said, no, take 3 months and pray about it and come back to us. And so we did that obediently and came back to them and really just felt like the Holy Spirit was bringing us home. And we didn't really know at that point why. We had some ideas that we wanted to adopt a baby, and that ends up being a big reason that we came home. But it was a hard time when we got back, about 8 months of really trials and tribulation and culture shock on this side of the ocean, to be honest. It was really a difficult time for us, maybe some of the hardest times in our entire life. And so as we came home, we kind of got settled back in. We opened Dockside Pediatrics. We bought a home. We got back in our church. We started a Bible study. We kind of got back into the American church life that we lived here and really like it here and love the people around us in our community. But all along, missions was always on our heart. And so in August of last year, 2018, the CEO of Kajabi Hospital and some other missionaries and Sarah Muma, who you see in this picture, came to Charlotte as a fundraiser, and they toured many hospitals around the United States to kind of get an idea of how to make Kajabi better. And so we went to this event to kind of promote Kajabi Hospital with other people. And while we were there, Dr. Muma came and talked to us. Dr. Muma is a pediatrician that was my partner while I was there, and she did her pediatric oncology fellowship while we were there, and she became the third pediatric oncologist in all of East Africa. And lo and behold, Becky is a pediatric oncology nurse, right? And so while we were there, Becky had helped her kind of open up and start her first pediatric oncology clinic, working about 1/2 day a week. And Becky trained some nurses to be able to give chemo because we were leaving, so somebody needed to help Sarah give this chemo to kids with cancer. And so when we met Sarah back in August, she came to us and said, I need you guys to come back. Sarah's clinic had grown to 5 days a week, and she was seeing hundreds of patients and kids with cancer, but she didn't have any nurse training or nurse help. And so she needs Becky to go and start a pediatric nurse oncology program at Kajabi and really train nurses from all countries around on how to give chemotherapy and treat kids with cancer. And so we didn't know if this is right. We continued to pray about it. In September of last year, what happened that changed all of our lives? Florence, right? So we took that time and that moment to really pray about it and really understand. And there were still some barriers that we had to get through. And one was the finalization of adoption of Maggie. And that happened in October of last year. And we really felt like God was confirming that we were supposed to go back to Kajabi and Becky was supposed to do this work. And so we've spent the last year kind of preparing to get us back to Africa, raising funds, speaking at churches and different events, and then support of Kajabi. And so here we go. So you may ask, what do you do there? Do you just go on safari all the time? Which I would love to, but I don't. I do work a little bit. And so we do provide pediatric medicine, and I specifically do pediatrics on the inpatient side. This is my pediatric team that I worked with while I was there. Kajabi Hospital is unique in that we're trying to bridge that gap from being a fully funded and worked mission hospital by missionaries to being a combination of local Kenyan physicians and providers and missionary physicians. So Kajabi Hospital has 50% missionary physicians, 50% Kenyan physicians, and we work together. Us being volunteers keeps the costs lower. We pay the Kenyan physicians to work there, and it's really trying to bridge that gap. It's a hard thing to do. There's a lot of difficulties associated with it and cultural differences and just the ideas of how to practice medicine, but it's really becoming successful, and it's a privilege to work there. So as you can see, it's a mixture of Kenyan pediatricians as well as clinical officers, which we have trained up in pediatrics and how to provide care. Just like at New Hanover here, everything that I do is involved with education. I never treat a patient alone without having someone there that I can teach, all right? And so we teach clinical officers and nurses and medical students and now we have a family medicine residency at Kajabi. And one of my projects when I get back will be to develop a pediatric inpatient and emergency care of clinical officers. And this is a good thing because we can start sending out these COs to provide good clinical pediatric medical care in regions of Africa that we can't access as Christians and people from other countries. And so it's a wonderful thing to be able to do that, and we're providing good quality education while we're there. I talked to you a little bit about Becky's program, and I'm so excited about that. It's going to be a really big deal, and I look forward to the opportunity to talk about that in the future. Just to give you a little perspective about pediatric oncology, if a kid is born with cancer or has cancer in Africa, they have less than a 20% chance of survival, and really until the most recent years had no hope of surviving whatsoever. In the United States, you have over an 80% chance of survival. Just another idea, Sarah was the third pediatric oncologist in all of East Africa. At Chapel Hill, there are 17 pediatric oncologists alone. So the disparity is great in this field, and it's amazing to be able to provide pediatric oncology care at Kajabi Hospital. So we're excited about that. This is just a short video to show you about the exciting news of that. So that was our first pediatric cancer patient in May of 2019 that was cured of cancer. And so we hope that there's many more coming. And so I kind of start out this talk of telling you we want to present the gospel, right? And so there's still over 7,000 unreached people groups in the world. There's 32 in Kenya alone, even though it's considered a Christian nation, which is about 85% or more Christian evangelicals in Kenya. But we still have a lot of work to do, and we do that at Kajabi Hospital. I told you about the education, so the idea is to train African clinical officers or medical students to become Christian missionary medical providers and go out into Africa and spread the gospel that way, some ways that we would never be able to do. We also have plenty of patients that come to Kajabi for medical care from Somalia and Sudan and Burundi and places where they can't receive good medical care. And as they're in our hospital, every patient hears the gospel at least once. And then finally, one other opportunity that I love is that I get to take short-term medical trips from Kajabi. We have a huge, great reputation all over East Africa. And so some of these countries that are completely closed to the gospel and closed to Christians coming in invite us to come in and teach their residents and medical personnel through medicine, teach them in something. And we can example how Christian believers act in faith. So this is a mission trip that I got to take to a country that's 100% Muslim and closed to Christian believers. These are the first 5 family medicine residents in the entire country ever, and I got to spend a week with them and teach them pediatrics. Such a blessing and honor to be able to continue going to where the gospel is not and unreached. So one of the last questions, and I kind of will start wrapping up with this, is what is the hardest thing you face on mission field? And I can tell you suffering is it. We encounter overwhelming suffering there. So suffering that really blinds you to any other aspect of what life is. So my primary purpose is to share the love and gospel of Jesus Christ with other people that are there. But I often think, as this child in this mom's arm is dying of starvation, how is this mom ready to hear the gospel? And it's just really not possible. That's a huge barrier. And as Jesus did in his work and ministry on this earth, sometimes you have to meet those physical needs to be able to present the spiritual need, right? And so that is a lot of what we do at Kajabi Hospital, is to address the suffering that is involved with some of this aspects of Kenya. So we see some of the most vulnerable and needy children in the world, orphans, kids with HIV and AIDS and tropical illnesses such as malaria and tuberculosis, kids that are in extreme poverty and have nothing. They're suffering. They don't have water. They have dysentery or diarrhea because of that. This is every day at Kajabi Hospital. Just to give you a little idea, over 69,000 kids under 5 years of age died in 2017 in Kenya. That's a 61% increase compared to the United States. It's a hard place to live. And so when we think about how privileged we are privileged. And one of those things that happened was in 2017, a doctor strike happened. Well, this is something that I had a hard time dealing with, to be honest. So all the governmental doctors walked out and the governmental hospitals shut down for 3 months. So people didn't have anywhere else to go except for private hospitals. But unfortunately, the private hospitals raised their prices by 10 to 20%. And so then they really didn't have anywhere to go except for they flocked to the little mission hospitals that are scattered all around Kenya. Unfortunately, in pediatrics, we saw a 200% increase in death rate that 3 months, 600% increase in death rate of pediatric surgical patients. And so the suffering is really all around us. I had 6 kids die 24 hours in my arms that year. And so it's hard. It's hard to watch the suffering. And so what is the answer to suffering? Is it medical work? Is it the work I do? Is it some of these other organizations that provide water wells or provide grain or provide food or provide some of these things, which all of these things are wonderful and it's good, but it's not truly the answer to suffering. So I want to share a quick story with you from Mark 24 through 34, a great example about the answer of suffering and the hope that we have in Jesus. And it's the bleeding woman, and it talks about Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all that she had. Yet, instead of getting better, she only grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she had thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized the power had gone from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it, and the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from suffering." So this woman had suffered for 12 years bleeding. She was an outcast in society. Her friends and family wouldn't be around her or know her. She spent all of her money on medical bills and treatment and lost everything. She was poor, she was alone, she was helpless, and she was physically suffering. And then she met Jesus. She thought, if only I could touch him. Immediately she was healed, and her worldly concerns were gone. Her bleeding stopped, and she was restored. And Jesus could have stopped there, right? He could have just aided her with her bleeding and her physical ailments and just stopped and moved on, but he didn't. He searched around for who he had healed at that moment, and he looked right into her eyes, and what did he say? He said, "Daughter." You see, Christ saw more than just a person with physical ailments. Christ saw someone that he knew as a daughter, someone that he knew worthy to go to the cross for and to save. And so if you want to ask why we go to Africa, this is why we go to Africa. There was triplets, so there's 3 of them. But what is the answer to suffering in this world? Even though we can physically have ailments, and even though we can physically do things, hope in Jesus Christ. That's the answer to suffering. That's why we go to Africa. Salvation was this woman's only hope. Jesus is our only hope, and our only hope in suffering is Jesus. I leave you with this, 1 Peter 5:10. It says, "And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered for a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast." God bless. Happy 4th of July, and thank you.